Wow, that's gone quiet all of a sudden. What did I do? Good afternoon, everybody. I'll do that again, shall I? Good afternoon, everybody. Good to feel the energy from the floor, or lack of it. Your lunch was too much, probably. Anyway, I'm Bob Taylor. I'm the CEO of Portsmouth Water, and it's my great pleasure to be chairing the first day, or this afternoon session in this conference. My usual playmate for this role, Peter Simpson, has now retired, so we have support from his former colleague, Jeff Darch, who's going to be chairing the session tomorrow. This is the 25th annual Leakage conference. So who's been to every single Leakage conference? 25. Who can put their hands up and say they've been to all of them? Now, Stuart Trow told me a minute ago that he's celebrating 53 years in the industry. Where are you, Stuart? There he is. Was it 53? 50. I was only joking. So you must have been to 25 Leakage conferences, Stuart. Okay. But I think we've got a full house again today, 200 people at the conference, and great support from the water companies, the supply chain, the consultants. I think these conferences are kind of a model for how we move things forward in technological terms in our industry, and there are many other areas. I sit on the Acquia board, as many of you will know, and I think the way we've worked in this area, which is such a critical area for us, is perhaps a model for others to follow in other areas, perhaps, with all of the various parties integrating so well. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our exhibitors and supporters. So they probably won't get their names mentioned very often in the next day or so bear with me while I mention them here. Aqualogic, Burmad, Clavel, Field, Gutermann, Horizon Water Infrastructure, HWM, Alvaro, SME Water, Suez, Synthotech, Technolog, Tetra Tech RPS, and the UK Water Report, which is our media partner. So thanks to all of you for your support for the conference and helping us to make sure it's a great success. We have got some delegates joining us by Zoom. Can they hear us now, actually? They should be able to hear us. Can we see anything on the screen from Zoom? No, we can't at the moment. Okay, so we've got people dialing in on Zoom, and you will have an opportunity to ask questions at specific points during the afternoon. So there'll be a roving microphone around the room, and there's also Slido. So on your tables, you will see this little device here, or this little sheet here, which has got two QR codes on it. One is for the questions and the polls, and the other one is for feedback. So if you could search that out and use accordingly. A few practical things as well. So turn your phones off if you could, and other devices that go ping and make a noise. We're not expecting any fire alarms today. You can see a couple of fire exits there. Just follow the hotel staff out of the conference facility if the alarms go off. Q&As we've talked about, feedback forms we've talked about already. So I think we've got all the dreary stuff underway. Now we can get on with the real discussions. So I just wanted to take a step back, really, and just kind of re-examine the importance of leakage. I spent a couple of days at this time last week in Saudi Arabia, interestingly, not really to talk about leakage specifically, but to talk about water resources challenges in the round. And when you look at some countries like that, they're running at nationally 40 to 45% water loss. They're expending a lot of money producing water because they desalinate pretty much all of it, or they use recycled water, which is also expensive to produce. So I hope that we can help them in whatever shape or form. Those of you that are running international businesses, I think there's a great opportunity there. Because actually we will need their help in the future. They know all about desalination, they know all about water reuse, and that's coming in our direction. So really what I want to come on to in a minute is the importance of leakage within the overall water resources balance in this country now, and how the efforts we need to make nationally to reduce are becoming increasingly more important as time goes on. But of course it's a priority and a concern for customers. In our numbers, about 19% of distribution input comes from leakage within the water balance, and we've all felt those pressures of climate change, population growth, the pressures to put more water back into the environment and preserve for generations to come. And we all have targets to meet. We all have to make a 13% reduction by 2030. We've got that important outcome of the business plan literally only days away. We've had the challenges of the weather in 2022, particularly in this 5-year period, and it's been a tough old grind, but there's still much more to do, and part of our challenge, in my view, is keeping all of the workforce motivated and making sure that we develop the skills and the capability to succeed in this area moving forward. So, where are we today? Well, I'm sure many of you will be aware that if you look at the long-term figures, we've reduced leakage by about 30% in England and Wales since the early 1990s, post-privatisation. And then there was some flattening out, and then some more success from there. We're at our lowest level for 20 years at the moment. And the last year just gone, that we reported on end of March, saw just below 4% reduction. So we are making progress, although it does take us a long time to recover from extreme climate events. Hot summers, cold winters, freeze thaws. It draws the challenge out. We're still committing to halve leakage by 2050. And as I've said, over the next few years, the next 5 years, we've committed as an industry to reduce leakage by 13%, a big chunk of that. And leakage as a total represents about 19% of our distribution input. And EA, amongst others, have said that that's not acceptable, that's too much. And there are many others, particularly from the customer fraternity, that would agree with that. So what are we doing about that? Well, there's huge amounts of innovation and research going on across the industry, and we'll hear a lot more about that today. Acquia, for example, has had 19 different projects on leakage related over the last few years. We've had great support from the Ofwat Innovation Fund, and Ian is here today. Thank you for joining us today, Ian Pemberton from Ofwat, who will speak to us in a moment. But we need more from the Ofwat Innovation Fund. We need to continue with that level of support into the future, Ian. But the support to date has been excellent. I think we're probably one of the biggest or best supported sectors in the industry. So thank you for that. But we've got plenty more to do. I think Jez's latest heat map showed that there's something like 400 plus projects going on across the companies around the country. Some of them will be repetitions, some of them will be overlapping, and all of that, I think we need to try to become more rational and more efficient about how we do that and collaborate more closely with each other to make sure we're getting the best out of the money that we spend in that area. So there's plenty to do, but there are opportunities ahead of us. So everybody is having a look at artificial intelligence. Everybody is looking at data and data quality and how to use that more effectively. We've got the benefits of smart metering around the corner. We've got satellites working for us now. We need to improve our capability on the repair side, and I'm sure Jez will emphasize later on that we're probably putting too much of our R&D effort into the detection side and not enough into the repair side at the moment, so we need to make progress in that particular area. But as you know, as I mentioned earlier, leakage is a major component of the overall water balance. We've got, I think it's 19 projects now being run through RAPID, which are designed to alleviate our water resources concerns into the future. This is mainly focusing on the southeast and the eastern side of the UK. These projects are worth billions. I think it's 14 billion all told that we're spending in that particular area, and that is a big challenge for us. But leakage is a vital component of that overall balance, and we have an important role to play in making sure that we deliver water security into the future and water resilience. So I think I'll stop at that point. I think I've just about stayed within my time, Judith. We have the leakage route map as our first presentation. And now I'm going to hand over to David Jacobs, who is the Leakage Strategy Manager at Anglian Water, who's going to talk to you about the route map, which I'm sure many of you are aware is something that we've developed in Water UK at national level, and something that we continue to evolve as our challenges change into the future. So please give a warm round of applause for David.
Afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Bob. Great to be here. 25 years Leakage Conference. I think I've been to about 20. 2006 was the first one I can remember. So as Bob said, I'm Leakage Strategy Manager at Anglian, but I'm here today really on behalf of the Leakage Network, just to talk to you about 4 projects that have been delivered over the course of the last year, consultant-led projects through the Leakage Network. So the 4 projects are customer-side loss quantification, so this was led by Artesia, calm and optimised networks, led by WRC, active leakage control KPIs, led by RPS, and mains renewal techniques, led by Joe Parker and Water Associates. So I'll dive straight into the projects. So customer supply pipe leakage and plumbing loss quantification. So yeah, led by Artesia. This project drew heavily on data from Thames and from Anglian. Between us, we've now got about 2 million smart meters in the ground, so significant amounts of data. The project looked at how can you use that data and is the way we're collecting it right, and concludes that actually hourly data is fine when you need to look at smart meter data to try and understand continuous flows. So that's the indicative flows that would suggest that customers may have wastage either within their property or on their supply pipe. Certainly in Anglian, and I think in Thames, most smart meters are at the property boundaries. So they do pick up both the supply pipe leakage and also internal losses. And of course, internal continuous flow could also be actual intentional use. So people filling swimming pools, people filling ponds, who knows what, but it isn't all wastage. And one of the challenges we have is how do we actually separate those 3 components? And that does cause us issues when it comes to reporting. We do talk to our customers, we do get feedback from some of them, but an awful lot, their continuous flow stops, we don't know what they actually did to resolve the problem. Now, when you dive into this, how do you actually define continuous flow? Simply it's water's going continuously into the property, but you have 24 hourly readings in a day. Is it continuous if it's just 1 day? Do you have to wait for 7 days, 20 days? What time of the day do you then assess the volume of continuous flow? Do you look at your night flow window, or do you look for the absolute minimum? So there's different ways that you have to think about when you come to define things. And what we found when we're working with Thames and Anglian, we look at it slightly differently. This is just an example of some Anglian data. So this is a cohort of about 150,000 properties. Meters were turned on 1st of April 2021, so it's a really good clean. There was no one had any sight of the data prior to that. And you can see the reduction in continuous use over that period. So it's about 14 litres per property per day reduction across that whole 150,000 cohort. Worth about 2.2 meg. And the number of properties there that had continuous flow has gone from 8% to 5% over that time horizon. So we're working with our customers, engaging with them, telling them they've got an issue through the smart meter data. They can get access to that information on their phones, and they do respond. You can see on the trend, you can see the big spike in the middle. That's the winter event of 2022, about 2 years ago to the day. Indicative of customer usage could also be, or leakage could also be people leaving taps on to stop their pipes from freezing. So just an example of the sorts of data you can get from smart meters. So, yeah, as I say, many different ways to define continuous flow. And in this industry, we really need to come up with the right way or a common way. There may be different use cases, so you may have a different definition if you want to use it to communicate with the customers. So you're probably going to leave, you're not going to tell a customer you've got continuous flow after 1 day. You need to leave it a period of time to make sure there's actually a problem. So you might leave 7 days, 20 days. But if you're looking at, well, what's the absolute benefit, you might want a shorter time period. So there's more work needed to do that definition. What's best practice when it comes to looking at this data, analysing this data, and also in terms of making consistency across the industry in terms of how we communicate to customers. So you want everybody all companies to have similar policies around continuous flow for 7 days, then we'll start communicating with the customers. Okay, so next project, calm and optimized networks. So this was the WRC project. So just a few stats, really. So about a quarter of the spend on reducing leakage this AMP so far has been on calm and optimized networks, so pressure management, pump control schemes, the like. Just over half properties in the UK, well, in England and Wales, are covered by pressure management schemes at the moment. There's a bit of a range there, but that's quite a simplistic way of trying to understand how complete a company's approach to network calming is. So things like topography of the network will have an impact on how much pressure management is feasible to do. So the project reviewed some key parameters that you can look at to determine whether or not a network is calm. So just some examples on here. But again, this is also simplistic, so just pick on something like transient logging at the bottom. It's great having loads of transient loggers out there, but if you don't have the processes and the resources to then do something to resolve the sources of transient, it doesn't really help you very much. So the project went out and interviewed a series of water companies. I think it was about 46 questions, and developed a maturity matrix, in essence, that people can now use to assess their maturity in terms of a calm network. And the idea is through the leakage network, we will be looking for further projects to get everybody to complete this, and then we can compare and contrast, and people can go and try and learn from people who are more calm than not calm. Okay. ALC KPIs, so a few more stats about the industry. So more than 3 million hours spent last year looking for leaks in England and Wales. That's a huge amount of time we have guys on the network looking for leaks. The way we look for leaks has changed a little bit over the last decade. Certainly there's more sensors out on the network now, whether they'll be permanent or lift and shift. So that does introduce new ways of measuring how efficient the process is. And there is a range in terms of those sensors. Some people have none, some people have really high coverage. So all that time spent, how do we assess how productive each company is? How do you know whether you've got scope to improve? So RPS used data from 5 water companies and have come up with a suite of new KPIs. So things like total water loss index, time taken to identify a leak by the volume that's lost in that time. You do need to understand the volume that's lost in that time, so you do need to know for that leak how much water you've lost. Water loss as a percentage of target. So leak volumes as a proportion of the targeted volume of leakage reduction. Repair time. So we already report through to Ofwat stats around the time from when the repair is raised in the work management system to the completion. You also need to look at the time from awareness that leak to when it's actually finally completed, so the inspection period up front. Lots of stuff about POIs from sensors that you can look at, so things like hours spent per POI, conversion rates, etc. And that becomes more important as the number of sensors increases. targeting effectiveness. So how well are we using all of our data to send our guys to the right place first time? Quality jobs, there's been several career projects on looking at repeat leaks. We should be fixing something once and not having to go back to it. And then on the customer side, how long does it take us to go through a waste of water notice if a customer leak is proving difficult to get resolved? So a good suite of new measures. Again, the leakage network, working with RPS, we want to do that across the industry so we get a good comparison so companies can use that to improve. Okay. And then the final project, review of mains laying and rehab techniques. So I think we all know that the mains replacement lengths in the UK in the last few years has been quite low. If we're going to deliver the targets that we were set for 2050, we're going to probably need to do a lot more mains replacement. I2S roles can penalise or do penalise companies if the supply is interrupted for greater than 3 hours. So the project looked at the benefits or looked at these areas here, comparison between trenched and trenchless techniques. And I think we've got probably 3 or 4 presentations today on trenchless, today and tomorrow on trenchless techniques that will hopefully drive the position forward. Without a doubt, things like cost, carbon are much lower if you don't have to dig an open-cut trench. Customers' impacts, not a big priority for some customers, a bit of a split between domestic and non-household. The key thing is that they're told that it's going to happen and they understand it. Does the current 3R rule stifle innovation? I think the industry is a little bit split on that, with some companies responding to say that no, it doesn't. Some companies saying yes. But really, with the lengths of pipe that we've got to replace, or likely have to replace, there's a big opportunity to explore trenchless techniques more, so we can renew more and spend less. Okay, that's me. So I think I'm handing over to Bob.
Yeah, thank you, David. That's really helpful to get an update on where we are with all those work streams. Now it's my pleasure to introduce 2 speakers, Glenn Mountfort, who is Director of Technical Consulting at WRC, and Joe Sanders, Senior Technical Director at Tetra Tech RPS, who are going to talk us through the decision-making framework. Over to you, gents.
Afternoon, everybody. Thanks for sort of everybody getting here and joining promptly, and great to see such a full house. And yeah, we were talking earlier about the need for a bigger room next year because it's another sellout. So well done, Judith. So the Routemap, delivering on the sort of commitments. One of the aspects we wanted to sort of talk about today was the decision-making framework. So starting off, decision-making. What do we actually mean? So I'm not going to read all that text out, but choices made under conditions of uncertainty, complexity and constraint. Now, I think you can certainly class leakage as having complexity, and I think we go back through time a little bit. We're talking here about the 25 years of this conference. I think I've been to 13, but going back 12 or so years, I think we had probably a lot more in terms of technical guidance for coming up with our leakage strategies. That was the era of the SELL, and what came with the SELL was some pretty good, a good technical guidance document that SMC produced, I think the last one 12 or so years ago. And I think what we're doing here is just talking through a bit of the thought process that we've been on since the Routemap around, what's the need for something to kind of fill what's perhaps turned into a bit of a void, bit of a gap in the sector, and to sort of aid with that decision making, because it is a complex topic. So very busy slide there, but this was just the extract on the right-hand side there about where we sort of went from having decades of economics being the focus to sort of really casting quite a lot of that out aside and going with the EIP targets, which I think quite rightly gives a remit here for leakage to reduce significantly, which is positive in that wider context of water resources that Bob was talking about. In that report, sort of 12 or so years ago, it did say, the importance of integrating leakage in water resources planning. But I think what's becoming perhaps apparent is just the need to formalise that and get some consistency. If you have a look around the industry, the PR24 plans are all out there, awaiting on final determinations. But there's not that much consistency in terms of leakage. It's embedded in amongst water resources planning, it's embedded in different bits of business plans. And I think this is perhaps just a call to say, do we need to get a bit of focus back and really sort of approach PR29 as an industry here with a bit more of a sort of a common approach. In terms of water resource management plan, the guidance is quite limited. So as you'd expect, Ofwat EA guidelines tends to be high level. You wouldn't really expect anything different. But since we've had that shift away from the sort of basics of economic principles, we've now got a range of different approaches. And I think the best practice in terms of WRMP doesn't really help a great deal when it comes to the complexity of demand management. So Atkins did a couple of those 2016 reports, decision making and optimization, but there's not a great deal said about demand management. There's a little extract there about the need to think about dependencies and interdependencies, but it doesn't really tell you how to do it. And I think that's a key point to sort of get across. That practical guidance to say, leakage is complicated. How do we actually put that plan together that's going to get that 50% reduction in the longer term? What are the specific problems that this gives us? The EIP target, is it truly best value for customers, society, the environment? Who's to say it's 50%, not 48%? So that might be something over the next couple of decades that sort of comes back around again. The baseline, is the future different? I think we're dealing with a lot of challenges: climate change, network deterioration, the big unknown around supply pipes and deterioration. There's also positives as well around metering and technology to improve. But one of the key things, leakage options, they're rarely discrete. And this, I think, brings a potential for optimism bias if we're not careful as a sector. And think of how many DMAs are you aware of where you only do one thing. It's probably quite limited. So if you've only got a finite amount of leakage to go after, make one intervention that reduces the yield that's available for the second and the third and the fourth option. But if you're not careful and you try and optimize and you've put them all in as the first option, the primary, then actually those bits of overlap don't necessarily get factored in. They may do, but they may not do. And I think there's perhaps a tendency towards some optimism bias there. And that might depend on WRMPs which particular regions of the EA are pushing for more granular detail compared to ones that are happy with less, etc. But not a great deal of consistency. Recognising as well the WRMP and business plan drivers are not the same. That supply pipe ownership is an ongoing issue, and where might innovation come along and help? It's all very well setting out a 25-year plan, but then if there's some wonderful progress made on repairs or something like that halves the cost or makes them far more sort of far more viable than say current technology, that could have a real impact as well in terms of where to bring in adaptive pathways. And just making sure we've got some degree of consistency, around the approach to making those decisions and recommendations. And this is just not going to go into loads of the detail here, but this is just working through some of the maths. And what we've effectively got are just a couple of those sort of short pathways, just option A and option B, and the impact that can have on how you present the economics can be quite astounding. And if you think about having perhaps 8 or 10 or 12 different intervention options, then things can get complicated very, very quickly when you're trying to optimize and come up with a leakage strategy. So it might seem intuitive to go and pile in lots and lots of different options into a strategic plan and optimize, but with all the interdependencies, it can become quite quickly very confusing. So hypothetically there, we've got some examples and showing some quite marked differences in pounds per MLD, just based on how you're sort of grouping things, how you're not grouping things. And that could have quite significant varying in terms of water resource management planning, AICs and AISCs. So I think this was just kind of us working in the background to just understand the complexity of the economics and think about actually how material is this. And I think the conclusion we're at the moment is, yes, it's a material concern if you sort of optimize things from everything being a primary option. Looking at scenarios is important. I think is the key message we wanted to get across, because that's going to be vital. I think to make sure you've got a rounded leakage strategy that's embedded in that water resource management plan, rather than lots of intricate options around DMA improvements, pressure management, etc., etc. At that point, handing over to Joe for the second half.
So Glenn said the picture up quite nicely. So what might the future look like? Potentially that diagram on the right-hand side is how everything interlinks economically from a quantity point of view. It's fairly complicated, underpinned with numerous best practice documents from UCWIR, numerous sort of like calculations that have to be done, numerous optimizations potentially that need to be sort of understood so that we get to that sort of end point. You'll also see there's a feedback loop in there, and this is one of those things that has to keep on going around in that respect. But also, as sort of Glenn sort of pointed out, if we then look on that sort of graph and look at how many potential permutations this gives us, this no longer becomes something that we can do in our head. This has to be something that we go and throw up on the cloud, potentially do the sort of optimization pieces with that. This is no longer a problem that we can sort of like look at fairly easily. And even if we sort of include it in sort of historical EBSD style models, the bias that they have for supply options compared to demand options might mean that this doesn't get properly looked at. So again, do we need to sort of like look at leakage slightly separately and then bring it together in the old way where we used to sort of like back in the day, there was the 1 megalitre option, the 2 megalitre option, the 3 megalitre option for each water resource zone, and it all cost an amount of money. Do we need to sort of like think upstream of that before we get things moving forward? Again, sort of like looking at how those scenarios that Glenn talked about and the sort of like the potential cost and also savings that we've got. So if we sort of like that top line there is the NIC target with the what we called the PIC target back in the day of reducing it by 30% by 2030. So again, the 13% reduction, and then hitting 50% reduction by 2050. Look at the difference in savings that we need to do in the next AMP compared to if we sort of like reduced it and sort of did, as Glenn sort of suggested, do that slightly slower, maybe the 48 or 30% sort of reduction by 2050. The potential cost implications just for one area are absolutely enormous. And again, you sort of see that difference from a very front-loaded sort of system to a much sort of easier deliverable over the period of time. So understanding how we get to these things is really important. And again, the problem's changed. It used to be what's the economic level of leakage. We're now very much looking at solving what is the economical way to get to a level of leakage as set out by the targets that we've set ourselves. Now, if you've got scenarios, You also have this beautiful thing then that comes in adaptive pathways. When do we know that our scenario is wrong? And again, one of Ian's colleagues there sort of summed it up. And it's really key to understand not just what these different scenarios might be and when we sort of have to sort of think about it, but what are the triggers? Is it population growth? Is it a bad winter? Is it leakage has got to a certain point? Is it that we've got the sort of resource sort of constraint that we've got there? And again, historically, we've just looked at the mean of all of these options. We've not looked at the risk profiles around these options and around these scenarios. And it's really, really important now that we need to look at different sort of points on these risk profiles as we go forward. So one of the things that we've looked at TouchTech RPS is the Kingsborough model. And again, this is just a model. There are lots of different adaptive pathway models out there, but it's one that we feel works quite nicely for what we already do in the water industry. Again, this is evolution, not revolution in our mind. So again, I won't go sort of around it, but you've got that sort of scoping, i.e. the NIC target. What is it that you want to sort of hit? That sort of important point. You've got the short and medium term planning. Again, this is sort of business planning and yearly strategy sort of sessions. You do what they call a robustness assessment. Again, every year, all the water companies have to report their WRMP yearly performance back to Ofwat and the EA. We already do those assessments. Can we make those different so that we can sort of get an idea of, are we achieving what we need to achieve? Then you have this adaptive pathways and again, long-term planning. Again, something that we do in the water resources management plans. We look a long way into the future, 80 years, sort of like, yep, we'll all be around there in the room when these plans come to fruition. So happy days, we've got it all right, or have we? And this is where the point where we're looking at these triggers. So again, that's sort of like top right of the screen. You could be on target or you could be off target and not hit these triggers that you need to go on to a different pathway. So a different pathway might be we're going to use more permanent loggers, or we're going to go to more pressure management, or we're going to do a different mix of the stuff as Glenn discussed. How do we know at that point when we need to shift because what we're doing at the moment doesn't work? At the moment, this is done sort of almost on a day-by-day, weekly basis by all of the leakage sort of managers in the room, but it's not done as part of the framework. It's not sort of there. And again, how do we support that so that we're making better decisions on a year-by-year basis? So with that, I'll hand back to sort of Glenn, who will talk about some of the thoughts that we've got of how we take this further and where we'd like your participation.
Thanks, Joe. So what we've just got here, I think back to that kind of what does a robust strategy need to include? Just four really simple but sort of key elements there. A backward-looking review, not missing out some of the maintenance of things that exist already, DMAs, PRVs. Also a look at leakage and weather. How's that changing over time? How's the climate changing? What's happened over time? Find and fix performance, asset performance, etc. Forecasting and is the future different? Really key, I think, there to look at both the positive and the negative. Take a really balanced view across all of those different factors. And then the optioneering, the PARM model that many sort of talk about in business plans. Prevent, aware, locate and mend, making sure all those options are there. But whether you end up with 10 or 12, that number of permutations and combinations is significant. And then finally, then the decision-making bit, thinking about the cost, but also those dependencies and interdependencies, how you then go through the complexities of optimization under the sort of different PESTLE considerations there. I think as a minimum, scenarios sort of do nothing versus maintain versus reduce pathways, but then that leads you into when are those points going to occur where, what are the triggers for you to go down different pathways as part of that adaptive approach. So I think some things there to think about in terms of what are sort of getting back to some of these basics might sort of look like in PR29 terms. And then just for us to finish off, I think we recognise here that there is probably a benefit to having a high-level framework that's agnostic to any particular modelling approaches that ensures companies present a robust strategy to the regulators at PR29. Decision-making is a key element to that. Also for regulators to be aware of some of the complexity in this area and perhaps the need to support their linking through to something. What is that something? Well, it's our intention to sort of share a more detailed piece than this slide deck and this presentation, sort of early 2025, looking at sort of paper, article type thing. But to do that, we want to do a workshop. So this is this will be an open invite to anybody in the room or beyond that wants to join and really sort of chat through our views and thoughts, but also contribute, what should that framework include or not include? How should it best be communicated? And then what might any follow-on look like? So logically, it might lead into sort of probably sensibly an Ofwat type report ahead of PR29, something like that. So very much an open invite there for early 2025, because we don't just want to stand here and present, a view that we've concocted in terms of what a best practice sort of decision-making framework would look like. But I think it'll be a better product if industry sort of buys into that, and then we go through appropriate channels to formalise it. So that's it from us.
Would you like to take a couple of questions? So that was a great presentation, wasn't it? We've got time for a couple of questions at this point. Nothing's coming up on the Slido at the moment. Any questions from the floor? Don't be shy. There's microphones ready for you. Okay. I'll ask you a question then, if that's okay. So, would a better decision-making information enable the question of leakage targets to be looked at differently? Should every company have the same targets and the same reduction amount?
I think the one thing is the cost of... That woke everyone up. The cost of water is very different. Even sort of, again, different water resource zones within companies have different costs of water, different sort of needs, different sort of requirements in that respect. So I think it does open up the sort of the opportunity to not have that sort of level reduction. I think the other way as well is that sort of trying to fill out the WRMP tables with leakage options is complicated, like Andy nodding away vehemently. I think this is one of the things, again, can we sort of look at it, redesign those tables as well as the targets to sort of make it easier for everyone rather than taking 5 years to do a plan every 5 years seems a bit of a bad use of time.
Take that as a yes then. Okay, anybody thought of a question? Well, that one's been answered. Oh, you're very shy today. I'll need to do something to wake you up. Okay, one more from me then. Should there be a more focused national approach to infrastructure decision making?
Yeah, I think that one's quite a key sort of point, Bob. Sort of have a look. Interestingly, one of the points we sort of very lightly covered at the start was government processes and the Aqua Book and having to go through quite a complex decision-making process for sort of public spending, but slightly different with the water sector, given that it's privatised. And I think it's really important that we get a joined-up view. What does society want? Does it ultimately want a lot of water companies digging lots of holes and having short-term interruptions, etc.? Ultimately, in the longer term, it's not just about leakage; it's about society more generally. There's water resources, but there's also that sort of social impact to think about. That we've been there, we've sort of tried to factor some of those things in, but ultimately that sort of approach to national infrastructure. We all joke about the old Carlsberg advert as it was, and actually getting utilities working together, etc. So I think it's really important that some of that national infrastructure work that is needed isn't just looked at in silos. I think there's got to be opportunities for efficiency through sort of more collaborative ways of working and doing things.
Yeah, I agree with that, certainly. And we've got one question down here, so if you could bring the mic here. Suddenly everybody's woken up and now my time has run out. What's the matter with you? There's a couple of questions down here. Yeah, I was going to say, last week somebody said to me in Saudi Arabia, well, 25 years ago, everybody used to come to the UK and France to get, to understand what is the model that we're all aiming for. This is in the developing world, I guess, primarily. And they don't do that anymore. We're not seen as one of the world leaders anymore because of where we've got to and the bad name we've got for ourselves by ourselves. So that's something to think about. Right, we have a question here. Andrew.
Do I have to press a button? Can you hear me? Anyway.
Try holding the mic to your mouth.
Sorry.
That's good.
Yeah, that's better. Wait. Okay. So in terms of, I was just thinking about Water Resources South East because I know it well, and all the leakage and other issues that they've got, which I'm sure will crop up over the next few days. Bob knows about that. Merrick had 4,000 supply options in his optioneering piece for water resources. And I wonder whether combining leakage with water resources is just too complicated. There's just too much. And you have to separate the two things out, because otherwise, if you've got 4,000 water resource options and God knows how many leakage options, it just becomes a numerical nightmare. And I'm not sure water resources people are the right people to make decisions about leakage strategies as well. So just a few thoughts.
No, yeah. Very good point, and it's sort of where we're thinking that it should be, that it's part of water resources planning, but not sort of fully integrated. And again, you bring up water resources South East, there has to be a constraint on the number of leakage techs in the South East as part of that modelling. Otherwise, we get sort of everyone has 300 leakage techs, and although Gareth, my colleague, I'm sure would love to provide 900 odd leakage techs in the South East, it's just not viable. So we have got that sort of requirement in that respect.
Okay, so we have one quick last question from Dean, I think.
Oh, it's Joe.
Oh, Joe. Joe's got the microphone, sorry. Possession is 9/10 to the law. Joe, go ahead.
Do you feel that the water companies are collecting all the information needed to make these decisions? Or is there anything missing, any gaps that you really think they should start measuring as soon as possible?
That's another really good
Great question.
Yeah, it is a really good question, Joe. And I think we've got a lot of very valuable data as an industry, but yeah, sort of what's missing. And I think certainly some of those questions, that one that came up a second ago there about resource constraints, I think is a great one. There's, what can be done on paper is one thing, but what can be done on practice is another. What are some of the other changes that might really have a significant policy impact on leakage? I think look at councils and how that's become increasingly complex depending on the sort of postcode lottery of councils and local authorities. So where are they going next? Who's going to introduce what next? How might those costs increase? So I think it's going to be really important to take that forward look and start to explore the sensitivity of some of those changes and how might that drive a policy away from perhaps being operationally more reactive and to a bit something that's a bit more long-term sustainable. Those sorts of decisions will be key based on that kind of information. So I think it's looking at those external factors a bit more closely and with a forward look as well as a backward look that I think is important. So good question, Joe. Yep.
Thanks, Bob. Dean Marsh, Artesia. I was just going to build on comments that you made there about there's 4,000 water supply options in the southeast. We have to remember that what we're aiming for is a reduction in DI by 2050. Yep. Half of that reduction is going to come from leakage. The other half is going to come from household and business use. So not only do we have all those supply side options, we have all those household and business use supply options as well. So yep. It is complicated. And it does need to be integrated at a certain level. Yep. But it's finding out where that level is, I think, which is key.
Exactly, Dean. It's pressure management, for instance, doesn't just affect the network. It's customer side impact as well. So.
Okay, I think we'll draw the session to a close there. Great. Thank you very much, guys. Show me appreciation. Thank you. So I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but high level, we need to find 5,000 megalitres a day. I think that's the number that's commonly being quoted now, nationally. And half of that is leakage. So if we're reducing leakage by half, we need to find a quarter of it. That's it. That's all we got to do. Just find that lump of water. Okay, let's get ready for the next session. Then I'd like to introduce to you two people. Firstly, Karma Loveday, who is the editor of the UK Water Report, and Ian Pemberton, who is the principal engineer, asset management and operational resilience. So we're going to start off, I think, with a presentation from Ian. There he is. And then they're going to have a little fireside chat in those two seats on the other side of the stage there. So over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess one of the dangers of going third on here is, as a regulator, is you might end up saying something that is contrary to what the first two presenters have just said. But I have to say, that's not going to happen. If anything, they've done half of my job for me already. So thank you very much. As Bob's just said, we're on call it what you will, a burning platform. The journey through leakage started through economics. I graduated in 1989 and first got involved in leakage in 94 when managing leakage was first published. Then it was all around the economics, the economic level of leakage, where it's actually in customers' commercial interest to go and do something about that. Moving through sustainable economic levels of leakage, socio-political targets, and now it is a water resource problem that we have to resolve by 2050. As you said, on that, I've got 4,700 is my figure, but 5,000 megalitres by 2050, and we've committed to 1,000 megalitres of that to come from leakage. So there's going to be improvements through new resources, and there's certainly, we hope and expect and anticipate there to be improvements through smart metering and demand management. And the slide on the bottom left predicts that there would be 76% smart metering on customer meters by 2050. My guess is that actually will accelerate because at some point it'll become politically expedient to move that towards compulsory metering. But that's where we are at the moment. So where are we now? Well, we're behind target. Don't think you needed me to tell you that. So whatever we're doing, we need to do some more of it. So most of the companies are reducing leakage year on year. The leakage operations, you look at this room now, there's 200 people here, each of us representing organisations with tens, hundreds, thousands of people all working in leakage. There absolutely is a passion and a drive and an enthusiasm to do something about that. And broadly speaking, we're making progress. I say we, part of the sector, the industry, the sector is making progress, but we're behind where we need to be. I've just made a little quick sort of hasty note here about leakage to, as far as Ofwat's concerned. Basically, I get to see one number in a spreadsheet, which is the leakage figure. It's kind of packed out with the APR commentary. Certainly got the RAG checklists in terms of the compliance, and then the external assurance on that. But broadly speaking, all of that effort is hugely appreciated. It's huge. It brings it all together, and it gets into one number. And I think there's more to go at. There's more to do. So we've already talked about the Innovation Fund. What's reassuring, what's good to hear, is that 10% of the spend so far on our Innovation Fund has gone into leakage, given that there are 14 common performance commitments and 580, I think it is, bespoke performance commitments. So it's a really good position in terms of the spend. There's only 4 projects that have gone through the Innovation Fund. So my plea to you is that there's money to go at there. There's energy is required, and it would be fantastic to see more leakage projects through there. So my colleagues on the Innovation Fund have said, make sure you can get a really good, clear business plan, what it is, why it's an innovation, why it can't be done as business as usual. If you can get multiple sponsors behind it, because the judging panel like to see that. Scalable, how it can be scaled out and how it's going to be a benefit to both England and Wales. And then, as I said, if you can get multiple people on there, that will actually increase the confidence of the judges. And I just note that that judging panel is independent of Ofwat, and I think that's one of the successes of the Innovation Fund. So I don't get to decide what goes through there. It's completely independent. Sort of what's not gone so well. So I talked about these RAG checklists, which you probably all know. So these are the individual components of the leakage reporting. If you look at it from all the companies on the columns and all of the elements as rows, it's a sea of green. It's fantastic. But this is a kind of a critical lens, and I really want to make that point. You know, actually, where it is good, it is good. But this is a summary of the elements where more than three companies report either an amber or a red. So it's just a little bit of analysis to look at where the areas of concern are. I should note that in the reporting guidance, that an amber at an element level means it's not a significant problem. But that bottom line, the amber, is slightly different, and that's the water balance gap. And 12 of the companies are basically saying, we can't get the water balance gap to be better than 2%. We did, and then COVID came along, and everything went a bit peat-tong, and now it's not there. So that is a worry to me. That is a worry that we're saying that we've got a high degree of confidence in each of those elements, but then when you add them all up, it doesn't actually work out. So that is a worry. And this is the nub of why I want to stand here today. I obviously can't prejudge what's going to happen in PR24, but there's a few things that are going to go and change. The leakage targets are going to be stretching, but I think they're achievable. I believe, got no reason to believe otherwise, that it's going to be anything other than a similar approach in the incentives through the ODI mechanism. We've signalled that we want to see the use of the burst and background estimation allowances phased out for trunk mains. I think around the room we would probably agree that we have focused hugely on DMA and distribution leakage, and it's probably the one that that actually has lagged a little bit behind. 3 o'clock. My colleagues are meeting now on what's called a policy forum, so that's with David Black, our chief exec. I'm taking a paper through policy forum to launch a review into how leakage is reported in the UK. So a complete kind of blank sheet of paper, root and branch look at all of that consistent reporting methodology, everything that's in the managing leakage methodology. No preconceptions here at all. This is a blank page. It won't affect PR24, won't affect the targets, won't affect the ODIs or the mechanisms of PR24. But realistically, it's kind of look at that, and it won't affect the decision-making as to whether we go to, we keep the same performance commitments for business demand, PCC and leakage, or whether we amalgamate those. But it really is to just have a look at how we can get leakage reporting fit for purpose for 2050. So as I said, I'm going to take that paper to through policy forum. I've obviously got approval to discuss that with you today. But the actual how that's going to look and what's going to actually happen, watch this space. there will be an engagement process that will happen, obviously, after the final determinations have been issued. So that was likely to be into sort of January, possibly early February. If you're absolutely busting a gut and you can't wait to engage with us, that is going to be the leakage. That's the email address, leakage2050@ofwat.gov.uk. The way I see it at the moment, there'll be a series of work streams for the companies, for the supply chain, and for other stakeholders. And potentially that's about a year's project to have a look at what that will look like, with potentially some shadow reporting. So really that's it from me, other than I now walk across there and get a grilling from Karma. I get the impression that was the easy bit.
Thank you very much, Ian. Yes, I've got some questions for Ian, but just to let you know, so you can put your thinking caps on, we will have 5 minutes or so for questions from the floor, so do have a think if there's anything you'd like to ask. Okay, so we've been asked to talk about in this session looking ahead to PR24 and AMP8, but I can't let the opportunity pass without first alighting on what you've just said and talking about the project for leakage reporting in PR29.
Cool.
I know you won't be able to give away too much, but perhaps you could say a bit more about the background and the context. So what concerns do you have currently about the reporting regime that you want to see addressed?
I think probably the most important one is, I think, the level of consistency and the level of certainty that the whole of the operation staff, the whole of the people who are actually delivering the leakage savings can have about what it's going to look like at year end. You know, the huge sensitivity that goes into all of those estimations and all of those calculations, and how that can actually kind of motivate the operational staff, and how we can actually get a better picture on. I'm loath to go straight to the IWA and real and apparent losses, because that would imply that we're kind of, that it's prejudged where we're going to go with this. But if you draw that as an analogy, to have a very good picture of what real losses are and what apparent losses are, and to have that as part of a consistent message. The other thing which I think we've alluded to there with the water resource planning and the EA is that we have a different methodology for reporting leakage in Ofwat to the Environment Agency and the WRMPs. And it might only be a couple of megs different, but in terms of public perception and public confidence, to have a small difference, I don't think it sells the right message.
Yes, and so there's clearly a lot to go at, and I think there is appetite, isn't there, for more robust and more transparent information across the board in water. I mean, mostly that's played out on the wastewater side so far, but you can quite easily see that leakage could soon become a focus for attention, and the whole public trust and the more activist regulator that Ofwat wants to be, so that it sort of sits in that space as well.
Very much so, very much so. And I think, we've already spoken about the explosion in data that we've got, and the head scratching that was probably going on in terms of how we best use that. And if we move, as I say, if we move to the point of being predominantly smart metered, we can do that. Like I said, from the moves to move away from the BABE analysis for trunk main leakage to we very carefully said a more proactive approach, not just said flow balances, because we know that there are troubles and concerns around what you can do on those trunk main balances. But I think we're just saying that 30 years post-privatisation, we can do something better
time for a fresh look.
than just an allowances approach.
Okay, and I wasn't here last year, but I did read the report, and I'm just going to touch on the fact that I think last year you spoke about licence condition compliance.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And so will this review and refresh effectively address your concerns there? And what does it mean for people for the next 5 years? So people that are going to be making decisions, investments, etc., deciding whether to work in the industry, if they're supply chain companies. Can you just give a flavour of what it means for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what I said last year was, I hope, that we don't regulate on the reporting guidance. We regulate on licence conditions. And the licence conditions broadly say you should have good control of your systems, you'd have effective management and effective finances to deliver your licence obligations, that you accurately report and you give us the information that we need in order to do our functions. So when something, it's a bit like when something goes wrong, it's gone significantly wrong. So so there's that. And I think what I'm seeing is that you know, our guidance is being sort of taken as a you know, very literally, and that there's a degree of what that guidance says. If people are complying with that guidance, then they believe that there's no case to answer, and it is a confusion. I think there's lots of places where that guidance could be improved. I think we've made a decision to just make some changes to it for PR24. One of the issues is every time we change the reporting guidance, we lose a consistency in the measure and how that can be analysed historically. So you've then got 5 years of leakage using this methodology, and then 5 years using that methodology, and 5 years using this methodology, and back and back and back, and you lose that historical trail. So my econometricians and economists and the guys who do all the clever stuff with the maths just tear their hair out at the moment you say, I want to change, because they just want consistency. And I wouldn't mind betting you all want consistency as well. So I think we've kind of pushed for quite some time now. And I think just it feels like the right time, you know, for the discussion we were having, you know, what we heard from Bob and from Glenn and from Joe, you know, it feels like the right time to just go, look, actually, let's take it out of the, it's pretty much out of the AMP cycle. You know, this review is not part of the PR29 price review methodology. It'll absolutely feed into it, and it will help inform the decision making there. But this is not, you know, the start of PR29.
Right. Okay.
PR29 methodology planning. This is an entirely separate review.
Okay. Well, we should probably move on because time is a bit short. But I suppose the message to the room is engage with the review. It's an opportunity, isn't it, to kind of have your say and put forward anything you want to. Okay, let's go on to where we are today then in AMP7. In terms of actual leakage reduction performance, there is a positive trend there, and I think it was one of the better areas in the recent water company performance report. So perhaps you can just highlight what you see as the key areas of success. I know you won't be able to talk about specific technologies, but in terms of generic areas, where do you see the real successes coming from?
I feel that this forum has an increased focus. You know, in the few years I've been coming here, I've probably 6, 8, 10 years. This feels like a really good space and a really good focus. We are definitely seeing more collaboration, and that's something that kind of has to improve and has to continue to improve. Definitely see that you know, that there's a move towards fast to adopt new technologies and new approaches, and a speed to do that. There's definitely and the passion and the enthusiasm and the dedication and the commitment of the people, you know, just bowls me over every year.
So that's a good segue into the Innovation Fund then, isn't it? So you said that I think only 4 projects. I think there have been adjacent projects.
Absolutely.
But more generally, how do you read this community's performance in terms of innovation and collaboration? I mean, I only dip my toe in from time to time, but there does always seem to be quite a lot going on, I would say. There is a lot of enthusiasm in this community. And
Absolutely. I guess my message there was just play the system.
Yeah.
You know, that's I don't have any influence over that whatsoever. Yeah, I would love to see there being many more innovation projects in leakage coming forward to AMP8. I think it's fair to say, the focus has been on wastewater the last couple of years. That wouldn't be any surprise to anyone. So, but there's a definite opportunity to do that. And I think it was nice to see that my colleague Mark Hannes, who runs the Innovation Fund, his advice was collaborate. Make sure you've got several project sponsors, because that gives the judges confidence. And they want to see that that collaboration is happening from day one. Clearly, it's built into the functioning of that innovation fund. That how the IP is shared and how it will be beneficial. But if you can go to the panel and go, we have these companies who all want to get behind this. It's just going to help.
That's a really positive message to the room,
Absolutely,
then, isn't it? Really,
yeah.
it's come on in is the message.
That's 100% my view now. Is that let's see those projects coming through, and let's get them. I'd be really keen to see fast adoption of technologies, and I think that's sort of slightly more into the spring innovation space. And Jez, are you talking about that later on, or no? Yes, probably. And so the Ofwat Innovation Fund, I would see as being a bit more further back in the value, or further up the value chain. So it really is. It's a bit more. It's not quite academia, but it's it's the things which are early in their adoption stage and then through. But we're going to have to drive those things forward.
Okay.
Have to hurry, you guys.
Okay.
Time for a couple of questions.
We better stop and have some questions from the floor then. Anyone have a question for Ian?
Oh, I like.
You give them 5 minutes, Ian.
If not, I'll finish up the questions I've got on my paper, Bob.
Okay. It's a question on Slido. Sorry, I haven't got my Slido pad. Let's have a look.
I haven't got Slido.
It's buried under there.
You've got one while you wait.
I have, yeah. I'll do one while I'm waiting. So just as far as the PR24 AMP8 is looking, I was interested in your slide where you'd kind of put it in the context of the 2050 ambition. And really there's a shift there, isn't there, in terms of leakage. It's not a nice to have anymore. It's essentially one of 3 essential ingredients.
Absolutely.
So maybe just a quick one on how does that affect Ofwat's high-level thinking about leakage? It's moved on quite a long way from the economic level, hasn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think I guess it's a bit of a head scratcher really for Ofwat, given that. I take a step back from that. Why I say that? There's now about 50 or 60 technical staff in Ofwat. It's the economic regulator. It looks at the finances. It looks at the customer service. It looks at the operability, the financeability. It looks at the all of the other aspects of the water company as well. And I guess for those people who are not embedded in leakage would go, why would pipes leak? Why? Yeah. So that's that would be fair to say. And they would look and go, this feels like it should be achievable. It feels like a target. It feels like it should be. And the more people who get involved in it, they realise quite how difficult, quite how technical, quite how involved, quite how passionate, quite how enthusiastic everyone has to be to go and get that down. So I think this, but it is also, it's not just one of the performance commitments. It is fundamental to the thinking.
Thank you. Time for one from Slido, Bob?
Well, I'm going to make a suggestion here. There's a whole load of questions here on Slido now for Ian. So if we miss our tea break, which is meant to be from 3:30 to 4, we've got time for a lot of questions here. So put your hands up if that's a good proposal. Okay.
Those are
2 hands up.
Perhaps Ian could answer them over
So we'll
coffee.
forget that. I think we have to stop because we're way over already. But thanks very much, everybody, for your questions, and thanks very much to Ian and Carla.
You'll have to press Ian over coffee in person.
We'll have a chat about with Judith about the questions that we've asked. Maybe we can do something tonight over dinner or something else to because there's obviously a lot of interest in what Ian has said with the changes he's proposing and so on. Okay, so we will have tea break, hopefully at 3:30. But before then, we have another presentation. So I'd like to introduce Daniel Wilson, who's Project Manager from Northumbrian Water, and Andrew Ball, Technical Director from HR Wallingford, who is going to talk to us on where we've got to with the National Leakage Research and Test Centre. And hopefully we will have a little bit of time for a couple of questions at the end of this session. Gentlemen, if you could just bear that in mind.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for hosting us today. Also reflecting on some of the things that have been spoken earlier on, I'm delighted to stand up here and talk about the National Leakage Research and Test Centre, which is not only a collaborative project between lots of water companies, innovators and universities, but it's also one that's funded by the Ofwat Innovation Fund. So just a reminder of where the project started. It was a collaborative bid, like I say, from lots of water companies, universities, research institutions, consultancy partners, to deal with a problem that we understand is the speed at which innovation is actually manifesting itself into usable products that we can use to tackle the leakage challenge. So the driver was the time taken for innovation to reach the market, and the lack of a real-world testing centre. So nowhere is there a testing centre of the size that we've designed here that innovators can bring their technology to and test them in a safe environment that will speed up that technology. And we also recognise that when innovators do have a technology that they want to test and then sell to different water companies, they're met with repeating demands on different testing protocols. So the other thing that the bid sought to do was to provide a certificate to innovators for their products such that they could then sell those products to water companies in order to deal with the leakage challenge. So this is a bit of the project journey to date. So in delivery phase 1, which was the very start of this project, started with us receiving the funds from Ofwat and the Innovation Fund. And we started to develop the collaboration agreements with our partners. We looked at the long-term viability of the National Leakage Research and Test Centre, and we started to draft together that operating model. We've since started to do the site surveys and actually select a location for us to build the National Leakage Research and Test Centre, which is going to be located at HR Wallingford's site, just outside of Oxford. And we started to develop, with many of the people in the room, the specification for the centre. What do we want this centre to look like? What material types do we want to be able to perform tests in? What operational regimes do we want to be able to implement through the National Leakage Research and Test Centre? And we're just at a stage now where we've completed the detailed design of the National Leakage Research and Test Centre. And if you come out to the display area later on today, we can take you through some of the plans that we've got. We've also completed all of the ecological and archaeological investigations around where the centre is going to be constructed. And we've met with the local planning authority at South Oxfordshire District Council to take them through our proposals. And we hope that's going to lead to a very straightforward planning application for what is considered a major planning permission we're seeking. The next steps, and I'm just trying to show on the bottom slide there of where we are on the timeline. We're going to be submitting our planning application either later on this month or early in the next year. We're going to be completing the archaeological mitigation works to verify the site. And then we're going to be tendering for the construction of the National Leakage Centre with some of Northumbrian Water's partners who have already expressed an interest in building this centre for us to use as a sector going forward. And then as we move into the latter stages of the project, we'll start the construction phase of the National Leakage Centre from spring next year, and then the commissioning towards the end of the year such that we have a centre ready for us to utilise in 2025. So when we as a project team picked up the National Leakage Centre as a concept, the brief that we pretty much had was, can you construct a 5-kilometre DMA that we can put some technologies in? So we've worked with many of the partners in the room, like I said, to develop this, which is the layout for the DMA that we've designed. So you'll notice that it's typically, or it's zoned into 4 areas. There's a slight different colour shading there. And what we're trying to do there is replicate the different types of DMA we see across the UK. It's going to comprise a variety of pipeline materials, and also we're going to be able to modify the type of backfill that you see around some of the different pipe materials as well, such that we can tailor specific testing and specific use cases for different technology providers. We have functionality through actuated valves or solenoid valves to simulate customer demand on the network, and that will allow us to undertake specific use case testing. We've got an opportunity to vary the pressure within the DMA or different components of the DMA between 1 and 10 bar through a pumping system that will be a skid-mounted pumping system located on the southern area of the site. We've also got a chemical dosing system there just to maintain the water quality within the distribution network. And the leakage, the water that's lost through leakage is pretty much recovered to the system in its entirety, although when there's a need to purge anything, we will have a discharge consent into the River Thames adjacent to the site. So this design, we haven't developed it autonomously within ourselves. We've had a lot of input. We've had WRC in particular providing some great input to the layout and the design work. We've had HR Wallingford. We've had Sheffield University provide an enormous amount of input to this as well. And we've had some great collaboration from some of the water companies, not least of all Tim Evans at Thames Water. So we've run that design through a number of test cases to effectively validate it and to make sure it can do what we think innovators are going to want to test at this particular centre. And again, picking up on some of the conversation earlier, we've aligned those use cases around the principles of PALM, and I think what we need to spend a lot of time focusing on as we steer the NLRTC is focus on spending more of our energy on the mend component of leakage rather than the detect, perhaps. One of the unique features of the NLRTC, and this was again an idea that came up when the bid was put together and submitted to Ofwat for assessment, was these what were termed leakage bunkers. So these are underground bunkers that can be accessed when they need to, with an opportunity to change out different pieces of pipe work depending on the types of tests you may want to do. So these are the designs that we've come up with, or the design that we've come up with, which will feature in our planning application. But effectively, operators can go down into those bunkers and see the propagation of leaks. You can also remove the backfill and surround and replace it with something else. And one of the technologies that we were looking at, or the innovations that we were looking at, is the ability to understand how a leak propagates around different pipe materials through using things like glass beads. So that might be a backfill material that we actually want to put into one of these leakage bunkers. There's 6 leakage bunkers dotted around the NLRTC layout to allow different types of testing to be undertaken in each one. Now, we've effectively had 2 streams on this project. One has been the physical design of the centre, what does it want to do technically, and one has been around who owns and operates the centre at a later date. So on that particular topic, I'm going to pass over to Andy Ball of HR Wallingford.
Thanks, Daniel. As Daniel said, we've had lots of workshops, both at your sites, WRC sites, and at Wallingford, to discuss how we're going to operate this site going forward, how it's going to be managed, and that's all influenced the design. So we've had water companies, we've had innovators, we've had Sheffield there, and we've agreed ultimately that the water companies will fund a large part of the cost of the centre via an annual subscription, and most companies have now signed up for that. But in addition, there will be opportunities for innovators to come along and be able to purchase time at the site to test and trial some of their products and services that they want to use. So, for instance, if you're an innovator and you've got an idea and you're working with a water company that's supporting the project, then you'd go along to them and you'd seek support from them, and then you'd have access to the site to be able to do the testing that you want to be able to do. And then ultimately that will move to the verification and the certification phase as well. So that's the proposed structure of the funding. In addition, as I say, innovators will be able to come along as well. We want to make this available to everybody who wants to access it. So it's not, water companies will have a big role in it, but they're not the ones that are deciding every single action. So if you've got an idea, something you want to test, you're more than welcome to come along, talk to us, and we'll be able to support you in your innovation. So there'll be people there as well as facilities to help you partner with other organisations and like. But you will be able to test your innovation, and you will retain the IP and those types of issues. So we've spoken about IP as part of the work that we've gone through. So there'll be support from HR Wallingford and WRC staff. And one thing that we're particularly interested in trying to do is reduce costs for early TRL type projects, basically. So those of you who might be at an early stage of innovation, who don't have a lot of money, be able to come along at reduced rates and be able to use the site. Just very, very quickly, part of the site, in addition to the DMA, which Daniel talked about, is what we call a sandpit, which is a smaller rig in what we call our food modelling hall. So those of you who know HR Wallingford, massive building, they're size of 3 football pitches, and we've got all these different bays, and we will be developing a very flexible sandpit area where you can, use short lengths of pipes, a few pumps and bits and pieces, particularly with early TRL, and the whole site's designed for a 25 to 30 year project life. Just following on from what everybody else has been saying about innovation, basically. So the idea of all this is to help innovate, to bring things to the market quicker. So we start off with early TRL at the sandpit, supported by the NLRTC staff. We can then test that on the DMA that Dan's described, provide a certification to say that this product does what it's supposed to do, and then that can be implemented across the sector.
We've got a few minutes left for questions. Do we have mics available? We have, yeah, at the front here. Any questions on this presentation? No? All straightforward? All gasping for a cup of tea, more like it? Right, well, perhaps you'll join me in thanking Andrew and Daniel for their presentation. Thank you. So I've just chatted with Ian, and he will answer the dozen or so questions that people have raised during his session, sort of afterwards, and circulate a Q&A around. He's very happy to do that. So thank you very much, Ian, for that, and for everybody's interest in the topic. Obviously affects us all in some shape or form. So now it's networking and tea break. You need to be back in here in 30 minutes. Thank you.